Yeah, okay, that's my cue. Good afternoon, thank you guys for coming. My name is Phil, as Greg pointed out a few times now. I work at ALM Works. I'm also a certified SPC, so I've done a lot of the structure meets the scaled agile safe environment. So I've seen a few problems that people have run into. I would like to say I've helped all of them solve it, but I've helped most of them. Some problems just were a little insurmountable or just not fixable. But we're going to go over a few of these cases, and then hopefully I can share some of the wisdom that we've run into and present to you guys a few potential solutions for some of the problems that we've seen. So I'd like to cover 5 aspects or 5 quasi-use cases. We're going to go about the transition from agile team to agile organization, talk about what that means and how can we facilitate that. Then we're going to look at the fact that now all of a sudden we have all these projects. How can we get information and use this information to have actionable items for our teams? Then we're going to look at some road mapping and agile planning. This is where the Gantt charts come into play. Then we're going to talk about talking to each other, about communicating the strategy of organization and figuring out how best can we share this and make this accessible to everyone. And finally, we're going to talk about integrating with DevOps and other departments. Sometimes different departments have different requirements. Sometimes they use different tools. So all these things are potential challenges, but also things that we can overcome and adapt and together be successful. So that having been said, let's very quickly go over what it means to be agile. I'm sure we've all read the Agile Manifesto once or twice. But in particular, I think it's really important to focus on the principles that make agile successful in a team can also be the principles that help organizations be successful in terms of being agile. In this particular case, I want to focus on the aspect being responsive to changing circumstances, whether it's customer requirements or changing market or finding out something about our product that means we need to pivot. These are all aspects that can come into play and we need to be able to adapt to. Frequent deliverables, whether it's through continuous integration or just relaunching our product at quick iterations. And finally also talking about flexible road mapping and open communication. Agile is very centered around the people in the organization, empowering them. So that's something else I would like to touch upon. Full disclosure, I work for ALM Works. We make the Structure family of products. So they will feature fairly heavily in the solutions that I've covered. This makes sense, but obviously I'd like to have pointed that out. So let's get started. Moving from team to program and getting some information out of this. So if we're in the Jira ecosystem, Jira is great for logging our issues, linking them together, and finding information that we need to work on. We can add attributes to our issues. We can figure out who they're assigned to, how much work they might expect to be costing, assign story points for complexity. And this is all information that we use to figure out what are we going to work on in this sprint, what do we need to prioritize, and what can we put in the back burner or for later. So as I'm sure we've all seen, this is the Jira view, comes with standard Jira in terms of the sprints. We can see 2 sprints here on a screen. I can see a few of them on the board, and I can see some information about them. If we look carefully, we can see all the way on the right, we can see some story points in little bubbles, and little icons transition to who they're assigned to, but that's also it. There's not a lot of custom information added here, and once I have multiple sprints, and I'm talking about say 5 or 10, some in the past, some in the future, I might want to still get information out of this, but that's not really something I can easily glance here. So enter structure. What structure is really good at is building hierarchies of issues based on rules that you determine. So whether you want to go by hierarchy of issue types, so going from, say, initiatives to themes to epics to stories, or if you want to look at things from an assignee and then from sprint perspective, we can basically define rules, group our issues by attributes that we want to look at, and then use that information to find where our attention should be focused, where our effort should be going. So our version of sprint management looks like this. It's a board that has the active sprint at the top, and we have some future sprints, and we can drag and drop. We can edit things in line. So I can double click on Chewbacca, for example, and change the assignee for this particular issue. And similarly, I can drag and drop these. And because structure is a reflection of the current state of our Jira, this changes the Jira as it is. So if you have someone else working on this same board and they move story 9 back to the backlog because we've committed to too much work, then story 9 will move to the backlog here and I will get a fresh representation. So using this purely for sprint planning is great. It's kind of a small example of where structure can help, but we can customize exactly where we want to look at. We can see the amount of story points that we've committed to. So knowing our velocity, we can say, all right, now we've committed to too much or we've committed to too little. We can see that we seem to be committing to more and more work in the future. So that means this sprints need to be changed and we need to basically move some work out of these sprints. And we can see assignee and status and progress. So these are things that at a glance already tell us something about the current status of our team. But where things get much more interesting is where we can use this to find information not about what the team is currently doing, but where best can we change and manipulate this effort. So one of the ways we can do this is we can use some custom formulas and we can make calculations based on our hierarchy. So in this particular case, I've got themes and some epics under it, and there are stories as well, but they've been collapsed for brevity's sake. And I can define a formula that tells me something about my epics and my issues. And I can look at fields that I have, custom fields that I've added to these epics, and this information can then be used to figure out either some version of WSGIF, some version of where time needs to be allocated or where time is being misallocated. So anything that we can define in a nice formula based on these fields, we can then make visible here. And then we can add warnings, make them pop up. We can sort them by these things, by these attributes, and therefore get more information out of our board. It's still the same collection of issues. Sorry?
What's the language for the formula?
It's a language that we've called expert, so pronouncing expert minus the T. It's something we developed. There's a cookbook that you can find on our wiki. It's very Excel-like. So it's got conditionals, it's got custom variables, and it's fairly easily manipulable even without a computer science degree. So that's kind of where we kind of hope to give you a few examples and then you can kind of take it from there. You don't need to, do any complex work with classes or anything. So, and you can manipulate not just numbers, you can manipulate text as well. You can look at other attributes such as duration and time. So it's a great way to get information, and it's the same set of issues that you could get on a sprint board, but now we can get much more information at a glance. So one of the important things also is access control. Not everybody should be able to move things around, change the attributes of my issues, change the assignees. I don't want someone on my team telling me, you know what, I really don't want to work on that, I'm going to assign that to Bob. That's not what we want. So you can set up permissions based on your workflow and your team. So I can assign a structure, I can make it visible to some people, they just can't edit it. Similarly, I can have other POs or PMs and they can have access to it and can manipulate it, change the rules if we need to add information or remove it. So you can, on top of your Jira permission levels, you can add a whole level of control in terms of who has access to what and who is allowed to do what. So that's one way to get your team all on board, because now we can all see what we're working on. We can see who's doing what the status is, and feel more involved. Because generally, the more you know about what you're doing helps people get involved and feel like they're part of the process. So this brings us to finding cross-project links and information. Jira kind of silos the information based on their projects, and then you can look at issues based on other attributes. But what we can do is we can just import all of the issues if we want to, or a subset based on some attribute. And then we can group them by their projects, and then again find information that we're looking for. Whether I'm looking for tickets that are overdue, tickets that are been moved from one sprint to another at some point, either I can say, look, we're not going to do this, so we're just going to move this, or we've been committing to this, but for some reason we aren't going to do it, now it's got to be a higher priority. So this allows us to get more of a cross-project overview. I can then write new columns and I can see, for example, how many overdue items do I have? And this is a board that, for example, shows me a set of issues that I have, and now I've grouped them by their projects. And now you can see these calculations are being performed over the new hierarchy. So the calculations are performed based on the structure I don't want to say structure again, but based on the hierarchy that you've defined here. So if you have certain parents and children, then that's the relationship that they have here. I can make assignees the parents and then all the issues that they're assigned to the children, for example. Similarly, I can get information if I need it for the finance department or for billing, for example. I can track how much work has been logged per project. I can track that per person again. So there's a lot of information that's in Jira that just isn't as accessible through just the vanilla Jira interface, that using structure will allow us to get access to manipulate it, and to be able to see, all right, this is information that I can work with. I might need to pivot the focus of my team in the next sprint, for example. And this works, again, based on whatever scale you want to work on. If you have C-level people who need an overview of the current project and want to see what the status is of their strategic initiatives or their themes, then you can present them with the overview and then add the whole hierarchy. If you want to silo it and basically only show people the tickets that are assigned to them and that's it, then you can do that as well. It's fully customizable to be able to show you at the scale that you need to work with. So you can do this. This is an example of where we've grouped by the assignee and then sorted it by project. This is fully customizable to whatever it is you want to work on. If I want to see the project that Chewbacca in this particular case has made on the hyperdrive engine, well, I can see his contribution to what has been assigned to him. And similarly, I can do that with the rest of the assignees here and the work that's being added. So anything I can define in terms of JQL or some other attribute in Jira, I can manipulate to give me some sort of information-rich overview. So that brings us to road mapping. Generally, what you want to do is once you figure out what you need to focus on, the next question obviously becomes, when are we going to be focusing on this? It's easy to say, all right, next sprint we're going to do this, but that's obviously not always very practical. And sometimes we need to be aware of other limitations. Either other teams have to get work done to enable us to get to this issue, or sometimes we have our own backlog that either we have enablers that we need to go through or blockers that are more prioritized. And these things need to become visible somehow. So one way to do this is using Portfolio for Jira. You can use Portfolio to roadmap. It has a really strong sandboxing feature which allows you to try out and see how certain changes will affect your roadmap, will affect your progress. When can I get to this issue? Another option would be to use the Gantt Charts extension for structure. Gantt Charts for structure are based on the same principle that they are dynamic based on what is currently in your structure. If I change the amount of issues, I change the hierarchies, if I add children, then the information in my structure has changed, and therefore the Gantt chart will update accordingly. And again, we believe in giving the amount of customization, as much customization as possible to the customer so that they can define the links, define what it is that they figure their project should be based on, and then have the Gantt chart fill everything in for them. So if I want issues that can't start until their blockers are finished, I can add that relationship. If I have a relationship in my Jira that says these issues need to start at the same time, that is a relationship that we can define and add as well, and then they can start together. And so all this is great for creating automated roadmaps and automated structures. But what you can also do is then drag and drop them yourself if you know something that isn't in structure. If someone got sick, for example, and they can't work on it today, things might need to be pushed till tomorrow. And you want to know what happens with the rest of the information and the rest of your issues. So you can do that. Another strength that you can do, you can use the Gantt charts for is figuring out where all your resources are going. You have teams, they have certain capacities, they can then be assigned to do work. You want to know how much work are they currently doing, how much work are they doing next month, for example. And if someone's over-allocated, this is a great way to see it. So in this particular example, you can see at the bottom there, team structure is over-allocated in the month of March, and it pops up in red, and therefore it's something that we need to work on. We need to look at it, figure out, okay, can I push something? Can I add more capacity to my team? What do I need to do to fix this problem? Similarly, I can change time zones, so I can work across the globe with different teams. I can have teams work at different speeds. Obviously, a team of 20 senior developers is going to work a lot faster than a team of 10 juniors. All this information can be added to the chart and can affect the outcome of our roadmap. So similarly, any information that you have about your team that you can quantify, you can add, and then the Gantt chart will do the calculating for you, and therefore you have a realistic idea of when are we going to get to this feature. When are we going to release version 1.7 or whatever it is we're working on. So this is a strength that comes from being able to create these hierarchies and allows us to then work on them, but also get more information out of them. At heart, Structure is a visualization tool, so that's kind of what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to give you the information that you can see at a glance. So one of the things that's really important is being able to share the view that we're doing. So not the view as in of the structure, but the view of the company. The strategy, the strategic themes, where are we going? What is our focus? Why are we coming to work every day and working on this product? And this is usually set at a high level. You'll have strategic themes that come under these strategies, and then ideally, obviously, you have buy-in from your employees. Everybody should believe in this, and we should all move forward. The best way to do this is to make all this accessible to them, to make them feel as part of the product. So what they do is you can do things like PI planning, or you can do meetings where everybody gets their input. You can put it all together, and then you have information that you need to then agree upon. We're all going to work on this vision, and therefore that's now the direction of the company. These things are not Jira issues, however, so they don't really fit into the mold before. But luckily we have Confluence, which is a wiki page, where we can put this information on. And they do have a relationship, though. We'll have strategic themes that are linked to these. We'll have epics that are part of these strategic themes, for example. So this information, yet again, can be added and put into our hierarchy so we can all see and work with it. So as I mentioned, you'd make your strategic theme in Confluence. You can then link other epics to it or other issues so they can be visible on both ends. You can go to your Confluence page and see which issues are linked to it. But similarly, you'd also want to be able to see them inside the visualization. So this is a really dense slide, so we're going to go over it in two different pieces. We have the strategy at the top, the strategic themes under it. They have epics under that, capabilities in this particular case. And then I've started organizational and time-based grouping. So I have my PIs, which are kind of a scaled agile methodology of getting together, using your introspectives and feedback from your people, and learning what went well, what didn't, what do we need to work on, what do we need to focus on. And therefore we can figure out, all right, we need these features, we need these enablers, we need to change our focus right now. And then we can have that implemented in our sprints. We can do all kinds of other, add resources, pay for consultants, whatever it is we need to do, we can then, do. And so it allows us to then, once again, we can see what the current status is, we can see what progress we've been making, we can add notes, and in doing so, we can all have access to this page. If you make this read-only and shareable to your employees, they can all see what the status is of the company, how all the other teams are doing, how they stack up, but also basically what the larger picture is that they're working towards. And so that is obviously very important because employee buy-in and employee motivation is a big part of successful organizations. And so with that, we come to the tooling. We have external and internal integrations that we have to deal with. Either we have external tools, we have suppliers, or we have people that we rely on. We have other tools outside of the Jira ecosystem that we'd like to integrate with. So you can do that together with either the Java API or the REST API. You can connect them in different ways. You can use this as your source of truth and connect it to other things. You can use it as the source together with Bitbucket of your code and then trigger continuous integration tests and then see the results. But similarly, so this is an example of that. We've got a simple CI tool that shows you the status of the tests. You connect it through a REST API, and now I can see, for example, here at the top, a quick aggregation for the top epic that 5 of my tests failed, 1 of them was blocked for some reason, and 1 of them failed. And I can see also who's responsible. So I could add, for example, who committed the code or who was the one that submitted the merge request. And now I can see who I need to talk to about that failed test. Similarly, a lot of people have been using this same tool because, again, you can edit this inline to do some sort of compliance testing. For multiple people will then go through it, they'll sign off, it'll show you who signed off on it, and therefore if we get into trouble down the line, we know who to talk to. But this is our tool, but you can obviously connect it to other tools. If you have Zephyr, if you have X-Ray or some other testing suite, you can connect it that way. We've integrated with a number of other add-ons because we very much believe that one of the strengths of the Jira environment is its ecosystem and the marketplace. So you can use other tools and integrate with those. Tempo timesheets, the ScriptRunner add-on, Portfolio, as I mentioned earlier, are just a small selection of the ones that we've integrated with. You can connect to them, you can add their attributes into your structures, you can then figure out, all right, I can now see, for example, if you do all your timesheet work in Tempo, you can use those teams as different attributes and add them to your Gantt chart, for example. So it's a great way to use the strengths of one tool, the strengths of another tool, and then build on these things together. That said, there are a few things that I've run into that I would like to pass along. Some of them may be kind of obvious. Some of them may be little eureka moments. I just hope 1 or 2 of them may be useful to you. But they're specific to Jira instances, so it's the vanilla Jira that sits under all of this. First off, if you start scaling your Agile environment, please, please, please figure out that each project should have its own issue types. And if we start adding hierarchies to this and adding to this scheme of things, it should create its own issue type, which houses in its own project. The reason for this is obviously you can then quickly add new ones. You know where everything lives, and therefore the information is already organized in a usable and fairly logical way. If you add 6 different issue types to one project and then you start a new one and you add all of those there, then you have a great view of one vertical project, but once the relationships start to connect to each other and you need to find more of these inter-project dependencies and blockers, things get a little ugly. So that is something that I see a lot. People, this is hard to change once you're already committed to this, so this is something that I would suggest if you're starting to scale and you want to add, say, capabilities to your hierarchies, then by all means do so, but I would highly, highly suggest doing so in its own project. Similarly, Jira Workflows, you can use Kanban boards, you can do scrums, you can, there's the kind of feud in between using Agile, scrums, and the waterfall method. Jira works with either of them or some hybrid in between these. Similarly, Structure does as well. What I do notice is that organizations that have a mix of them, where one team does waterfall and another team does scrum, they often have a hard time coordinating their efforts. So it's often good from an organizational perspective to agree on one of these methods, be it waterfall or be it scrum. And it's a good idea, especially as you get more cooperation between the teams. If you either merge them together into an Agile release train or something else, then it's a good idea to have everybody already used to working in the same way, because then as you group them together into larger teams, we're already familiar, we have the same terms, we use the same definitions for when something is an epic, when something is an enabler, and so it facilitates a level of communication, a level of convergence in terms of how we can all get together and be one big team. So that's something I see a lot that can be very helpful. Similarly, by definition, it'd be a great idea to, once you start adding multiple custom link types, to agree on what these things mean. So blocker is fairly self-evident, but once you have an implements and a duplicates and several other link types, it's a great idea to have a central repository, be it on your Confluence or a SharePoint or something else, that you agree on the definition of these, and then we're all building this Jira instance and all this information together. Because if someone else says, all right, I'm going to add these links and they're just going to be implements, and someone else decides to, I want to see everything that's implemented by this, and I all of a sudden have 10 other stories or epics or something in this issue or attached to it, then things get a little confusing. So it helps if we're all marching in the same direction. we agree on these definitions, and we're all working basically in the same workflow, be it in different teams. And I apologize, this was supposed to be animated, but basically it's important to remember that we're all working in the same team. We're all working towards the same goal. So even when there are friction or there are issues where one team has a different priority than another team, it's important to remember that at the end of the day, we all would like to be working towards the same success. The success of the organization should be shared. So it's important to celebrate these things. When one team does really, really well and gets praised, it's good to share this, whether it's at the PO level or the PM or individual developers. Success is shared just as failure is shared. And it's important that we remember that even though they're on different teams, we are all on the larger same team, and we're trying to work together to get to the same common goal. So with that having said, that would be the end of my presentation. If you have any questions that you come up with later, you can always email me. I'll field them now as well.
Okay, so on one of the slides, the one that you had the visualizations, you had a column for the risks.
Yes.
So
Hold on, I can probably get to it. This one?
how do you capture that?
So this is that same tool that I mentioned here. A non-English speaker developed it. It's called Testy. But basically what it allows you to do is you can add, it's basically a multi-select field. And you can pick one, and then I can aggregate how many of those I have in my hierarchy. And if I do them with tests, then I have build, passed, failed, and a blocker, for example. But I can define different categories as well, such as resolved risk or at risk. And using those and different colors, I can get different meaning here in this column. So that's basically kind of abusing the functionality of that tool to get different information out of it. Any other questions?
Come on, some more questions. Nothing?
No? All right, then I will leave you with, as I was at the end, any questions that you come up with later, you can send me an email. Otherwise, this is a demo that you can play with. I brought one with me as well, so if you want to see the structure in action, you can either come over to me afterwards, ideally after we finished eating so I don't talk with my mouth full, and then I can go over some of it. If you have a use case you want to go over, by all means, please ask. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good job.